hustle is a season. It's not a lifestyle. You can hustle up. There's nothing wrong with hustle, but it's not sustainable. It's not a longevity plan.
You're listening to the Unnoticed Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Jim James, sharing experience-led stories of success from founders so that you can build a better business.
My guest today burned out the old-fashioned way before we all boarded the AI roller coaster. But having successfully rebuilt his world, he's created a practical framework for recovery and growth that I've read, I've enjoyed. And so I've asked him to come and talk us through it today because I know that this will be helpful to you. Welcome to Chris Ducker, serial entrepreneur and author of The Long Haul Leader. Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on the show because I've followed your work with Youpreneur, of course, and see you reincarnating now with your book and authoring support, and loved The Long Haul Leader. But let's start with the elephant in the room, Chris. Is AI creating a solution or giving us all a greater risk of burnout because it's always on and it's setting the pace? That's the danger. We're all on the roller coaster. What's your view on AI and the risk it's creating for entrepreneurs?
I think overall we should be looking at it from a positive perspective. I think a lot of people are probably still quite confused about how to utilize it in their business in the best way. I know that I was a little late to the party in terms of wanting to understand AI better and wanting to appreciate how it can help us run, support, grow, scale what we're doing. Once I was on board, but we were talking just before we hit record here, I don't use AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude, on a daily basis. Of course, I use them. They're installed on my computer and, I can see the little Claude logo on my taskbar here or my nav bar on my Mac. I'm not like a lot of people that are using it every single day. I'm not doing that. However, I've given my team, albeit a small team, only 4 full-time employees now, since selling a couple of businesses, I've been able to size down that payroll quite substantially.
That must be nice to not have to worry about that every month.
So good. Yeah. I enjoyed being an employer. I enjoyed being a quote-unquote boss. But that era has gone now. And when you've got up to almost 500 employees, I think we had about 480 odd people at one point, and to go from that to just a handful of employees is fantastic. And so I ultimately given them free rein to be able to utilize AI for any purpose in terms of being proactive, productive, et cetera, et cetera. But I have made it very clear that the output of the content very specifically that we produce, so we're talking about our weekly newsletter, Expert to Authority. We're talking about, anything that you might see on social media. We're talking about any kind of scripts that I might write in regards to solo podcast sessions and things like that, which I don't do very often. But if I've got a point that I really want to, slam home, I will script it in some capacity. All that stuff has to come from me. It has to, because it's my personal brand. That doesn't mean that we're not utilizing AI to be able to ideate certain ideas and particularly series of posts and things like that. We did a 6-part podcast series on how to write, launch, market, sell, and make money from a business book, which we published all at once for people to binge listen on the Youpreneur podcast feed. And it went off like gangbusters. People absolutely loved it. So that was ideated using, I had no idea what platform the team used to do it, but it came to me in terms of sort of different sections, different bullet points and different ideas. I went then ahead and decided to, elaborate on certain things and dive deeper on certain things, or even completely omit certain subjects and topics as well. So I think overall, is it here to help us? Yes. Is it here for us to become more productive? Absolutely. Is it something that the average small business owner / entrepreneur should be over concerning themselves with? No, I don't think so. Will it contribute to burnout? I think it's like any other system, tool, or process. It has the ability to get out of control, but we're the ones that are still in control. That's why it's our business.
I think that's a really refreshing perspective, but it'd be interesting to hear your view because, we used to have this issue about printing presses and about tractors and all mechanization, and the internet and so on was all, I wouldn't use it myself. But it sounds as though, Chris, you're in a position where you can delegate to people who then gain superpowers by using AI, but you're retaining the authenticity and the guidance of your own personal brand.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, it's called personal brand. It's not called AI generated brand. I just feel that, particularly as a personal brand entrepreneur, that if you are creating content and publishing that, to be able to build that brand, to attract that avatar that you're wanting to serve, it's got to be you. It's got to come from you. It can't come from a computer or a program. It's the very core of it has to come from you. Like I said, you can utilize it to ideate and get things out of your head a lot faster. That's fine. But ultimately, you've got to get it out there and doing it on your own back.
Yeah, and there's some school of thought really that the last defense against AI will be being human, ironically enough, right? Yeah. That actually it will be your human element that differentiates you from the competition and the big companies.
Well, yeah. And, like my good friend Sally Hogshead, who's an incredible New York Times bestselling author and speaker, she said many, many years ago, being different is better than being better. I do feel that is still 100% legitimately true. Being different is much better than being better when you want to stand out and find the right people to work with, to sell your products, services, experiences, whatever it is. I think it's incredibly important that we don't lose track of that,
And Chris, one of the things that struck me listening to your podcast, reading the book and looking at the reviews, you've got, Amy Porterfield, you've got Sally Hogshead, who I kind of just also heard the other day too about, better to be different. And that's a differentiator and a source of competitive advantage long-term to be yourself. You've managed over the years to build an amazing community of thought leaders who are both supporting you and that you support. What's been the secret to that success? How have you built that?
I built it slowly, and I think that's the key. The issue nowadays is that everybody wants things just like that. I think a lot of people, particularly the younger generation of entrepreneurs, they expect things to happen immediately. I've been posting on Instagram for 3 weeks now, 3 times a week. And, I've only got 12 new followers. I'm like, well, be happy. That's 12 people. If you had all those people around for a barbecue, your back garden would probably be full. Yeah. So I think that we've got to understand that when it comes to community building specifically, this is not going to be something that happens overnight. People's attention spans are the lowest they've ever been. And also, regardless of what niche you're serving, you are in a competitive niche now. The competitiveness of business has never been as high as it has today because the barrier to entry is as low as it's ever been as well. I truly believe that the reason why I've been somewhat successful in building communities over the years, and there's much bigger communities out there than ours at Youpreneur and at my personal brand, is that, we've shown up in an authentic way. We've shown up consistently. We've shown up with serving first and selling later as a philosophy. And we've been around for a pretty long time, Jim. Yeah. I think that's the thing is we're about to celebrate 11 years at Youpreneur in September this year. So you can look back on that. You can look back at when we used to run large events at the Queen Elizabeth Centre in London. You can look back at the tropical think tank events that we ran in the Philippines, in 2017, 18, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can look back on all those things and understand that, we've been around for a while. Yeah. And if the community is still hanging around, there's got to be good reasons for that, right?
Yeah, and I think that you've touched on a few things that I've noticed about what you're doing. Is one is the generosity, what you share, but also the consistency of quality, Chris, which is also impressive. Having run my own businesses for 25 years, to maintain consistency and focus for that length of time is really impressive. And it's a testament to your endurance. And maybe this is also bringing us a little bit onto the book topic. Entrepreneurs suffer some form of burnout, especially those of us that start early. You went to the Philippines when you were quite young. I think you went out there for work. I went to Singapore in 1995 as a 27-year-old and started a business. And
So I was 27 when I went to the Philippines.
Okay. Chris, in his book, Long Haul Leader, has got an amazing sort of recipe and framework, part of which is self-care. Let's move on to this book and the Long Haul Leader, because what you've managed to do, which is really impressive, is to maintain this quality and this generosity, but also then to reinvent yourself. With this book, The Long Haul Leader, do you want to just tell us what's been the genesis of that book, and tell us why you've written this book?
Yeah, so 2021, flashback to that. We were all in the middle of the pandemic. The first year of the pandemic, 2020, obviously we, pretty much like every business on the planet, maybe bar a few, had to pivot quite substantially. At Youpreneur, we are at first, I guess, an educational business, right? We help entrepreneurs, and particularly personal brand entrepreneurs, to build their business in a sustainable, profit-driven manner, right? That's what we've always been about. And so we used to do, I would say, probably about 80% of that would be done in person at live events, both here in the UK as well as in the US, and even as far as Australia, where I'd run, smaller mastermind events and things like that when I was traveling for speaking engagements. Add on an extra 2 or 3 days to do these smaller events for our community around the world. And so I think the big thing here is understanding that if you show up in the right manner for long enough, people will appreciate where that heart-centered focus comes from. And that's what I did. In 2020, we pivoted. We went all in on going online. We grew our business 5x in that year, 2020, because we could open up everything we were doing to an international, serving people internationally online. And so, at the program at the time was the Youpreneur Incubator, which was a 1-year program. And we went from about 90 members at the beginning of 2020 to about 380 members at the beginning of 2021. So it ballooned, it went mad. And then middle of 2021, we have our sabbatical every August as a family. And we went away, and I realized going into that sabbatical, thinking to myself, man, I really need this one. Like, I'm exhausted. Like, I feel really tired, mentally, physically knackered, and we came back from that at the end of August. And I remember walking into this very office at the beginning of September, sitting down, turning on the computer for the first time in a month, and staring at the screen for about, 10, 15 minutes or something, turning it off, walking back out through the doors behind me. And I didn't come back in for another 3 weeks. There was something wrong. There was something up, because I always have a pep in my step when it comes to work. This is the really ironic thing. I was loving the work we were doing. So I wasn't not enjoying my work. And I think that's a key thing to point out here, because a lot of people think, oh, burnout, probably hate the work you do. You're showing up for the wrong reasons, yada, yada, yada. No. I was showing up for the right reasons. I was loving everything I was doing from a work perspective, but I was just doing it way, way, way too much, plain and simple. And so I went to the doctor. I had some blood work done. I actually went in and spoke with a mental health expert as well, because I was feeling kind of anxiety driven quite a bit. And it ended up with me being diagnosed with acute anxiety, depression, and put on antidepressant medication initially. And then the big one was phase 3 adrenal failure, which is a clinical term for burnout fundamentally. Wow. So your adrenals create cortisol, which is your stress hormone. And when you stop creating that, when your adrenals go into phase 1, phase 2, and then eventually phase 3 failure, you don't have any stress hormone. Therefore, you can't handle stress. Therefore, you burn out even further. And that was basically what had happened. I was on the antidepressants for about a year, slowly took myself off those, started therapy for anxiety, and just talk therapy, nothing sort of intense or anything, just talking through feelings and all that kind of stuff, which I never thought I would, have a therapist in any way, shape, or form. No, a lot of my American friends do, and fair play to them. It's a big thing in America. I'm going to talk to my therapist about this, but I think it really taught me that even if you're really enjoying what you're doing, if you're doing too much of it for too long, which I certainly had been, burnout's inevitable. It's not a matter of if, it's just when. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are in that spot. They're in that position.
Chris, I think it's really, really important there. A couple of things that you said. One is that you can be enjoying what you're doing and still burn out. As you say, the assumption that you burn out because you're forcing yourself to do something that you don't really want to do. But actually, I found with my PR firm, after a decade, and I'd grown it like you and so on, but actually I just also one day just couldn't get out of bed, and you feel this huge sense of anxiety that you're not leading anymore. You feel, that you're not going to make the money. You're not going to look after your team. You're not look after the clients. But you don't really know where to look, right?
I'm curious to know your thoughts on this as well. I'm going to turn the mic back on you here, Jim. When we exited from our larger business in early to mid 2023, and we went from almost 500 employees to, at that point, probably about 30 or so, I kind of had, for the first time really in my career, I think I kind of had a little bit of imposter syndrome. I was like, well, am I this serial entrepreneur anymore? Like I don't have all these people working for me anymore. I no longer have a medium to large sized business that I'm running. Am I still really that serial entrepreneur? And I kind of had this thing that I needed to battle with for a little while. And I spoke with a good friend and mentor of mine over in the United States about it. And she said to me, well, of course you are. You've exited successfully from this business that you spent 15 years building. You've still got another 2 businesses. You are a true blue serial entrepreneur. And with her tough love, she kind of slapped me out of it. Looking back on that, and I've spoken about this a few times now, I didn't see that coming at all. Not at all. When you had your PR agency up and running and you went through this, how did you feel about this? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of how we associate ourselves with the company and our identity being interlinked, right? What one realizes is that we really attach our activity to our identity. I do things, therefore I'm an entrepreneur. And when I'm no longer doing those things, because I've sold off those various businesses like you, not as successfully as you have, but then you find yourself saying, well, am I really an entrepreneur? And so, Chris, thanks for turning the mic back on me, but coming back to you again,
No, but it's interesting. I was curious. You gave me a good answer because I don't think we're the only ones that think like that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs think like that when they're presented with an opportunity to either, and the word exit, there's so many different versions of that. You either sell it, or you slowly but surely have yourself bought out, or you shut the business down because you don't want to run it anymore. Yeah. There's so many different ways to look at exiting, right? But I'm sure there's got to be thousands of entrepreneurs right now thinking about this exact same thing of, when I'm no longer connected to this thing that I've built, what am I? Who am I seen as? Sort of thing. Yeah. Particularly in this very social media heavy environment where everything's a bloody highlight reel right now. That's why I don't like social media, really. I'd prefer not to have to include it in my business. But as a personal brand entrepreneur, it's kind of goes hand in hand, really,
Well, and Chris, it's very interesting you say that, because one of the conversations I've been having as we move into this next stage of life is, am I an entrepreneur or am I a coach? Am I a business consultant?
Yeah.
Which I think brings us nicely onto a topic in your book, Chris, which is about legacy. Because I thought what you've done really neatly there is to transition from I'm an entrepreneur to I'm a citizen, I'm a father, I'm a contributor.
Yeah.
Can we just talk about some of what you've built in the framework there in terms of how entrepreneurs, and let's face it, men and women in their 50s and 60s, exited or not, how they can redefine who they are? Because let's face it, most of us will hopefully live till 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe have quite a long time to redefine and play an important role in society. Take us through that, Chris.
Now, longevity overall is is a great thing. And I think that a lot of us are going to live longer than we would have done if we weren't.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yeah. If we weren't in this period of time right now, I believe we will probably live on average about 10 years or so longer, hopefully, with a little bit of luck, right now. Because of things like, and you mentioned sort of some of the biohacking stuff, the red light glasses to promote better and deeper sleep, cold plunges and saunas and, all these other things that I wouldn't have seen myself doing 3-4 years ago, but now I'm all over them, because if there's anything I can do as a father, first and foremost, a husband secondly, and then a leader third, if there's anything I can do to be around longer for all of those reasons, I'm all in on it. I'm all in on it.
I mean, I think, again, come back to some of the Americans like John Lee Dumas, they're now talking about, longevity and sustainability, which is kind of a luxury after you've attained wealth, isn't it, Chris, to some degree?
Well, yes, to a certain degree, you are right. This burnout really taught me that if I didn't look after myself properly and be quite selfish about it, that, I wasn't going to be able to build that level of legacy that I really wanted. And I think as entrepreneurs, we also get a little twisted in our idea of what legacy really is. Like, oh, I want to, build great companies or promote, great charities or, create products that change people's lives, all these other kind of legacy things. At the very core of it, my legacy is going to be my children. And it's a very simple focus of me to enable my children to be able to be more successful than I have become, be happier than I have become, be healthier than I have become, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's what I'm all about with my level of legacy, is to be able to leave a lasting impression, first and foremost, on my kids, right? And then secondary to that, to be a great partner, to be a great spouse to my wife, and to love on her as much as I possibly can. And then lastly, as a leader, is to be able to help people affect their own level of change, their own idea of change and servitude in what it is that they're doing from a business perspective as well. There's a really, really good book called Half Time, written by a gentleman by the name of Bob Buford. And he talks about going from success to significance. And I think that's a really, really cool way of looking at what legacy really is,
Yeah, that's what's interesting as well for me in reading your book and listening to you talk as well, is that you've kind of flipped the script, because for many people, legacy starts with external influence, to be famous, to be the first $1 trillion person. If you look at someone like Elon Musk, he's got all the money in the world and he's got 12 children, half of whom are trying to estrange themselves from him. I really enjoyed your book because you've got your personal details, but you've got an intellectual structure. And as an entrepreneur, I also liked that it was practical. But I also really resonated with your sense that it actually starts, if you like, at home, right? It starts with your children. I've been very blessed to take my girls to school every day on scooters, first of all in prams and then scooters and then on the back of the bike and then, and then teach them to drive. So now they drive themselves to school, right? And I love that we've been able to play that role, but I thought it was really interesting that you start with your family and then you go external rather than external to internal. Where does that come from, Chris? Because it's a little bit counterintuitive, because many people think success is about fame, not necessarily about connection. So where does that come from for you?
It's just something I've always done, Jim. We started my business, with my wife. She's 100%, by my side and supportive, and she runs still now. I mean, even when we have almost 500 employees, now we've only got a handful, like she still runs the finances. She still runs the ops of the business. I'm the face and the marketing and the sales and, kind of delivery side of things. My daughter, Chloe, my eldest, she is the COO at Youpreneur now. So she runs things sort of day to day and works with our clients from an admin and kind of operational sense. If we put on a live event, it's all her. Like everyone's, oh, Chris, your events are amazing. I literally show up, strut myself like a peacock on stage for the weekend and then leave. Like my daughter Chloe does everything. She does
Well,
everything else.
And how old is Chloe?
So she's 27.
Okay, fantastic. Well,
she's 27.
The magic age, 27. I mean, takes
Yeah.
after her dad, right? Gets in the business at that age.
Yeah. My eldest, CJ or Chris Jr., he's 30. He doesn't work for the company full time, but he will help out with videography. He's an incredible videographer and content creator. He actually works with F1. And then my second youngest, Charles, is almost going to be 18. He is a complete self-taught graphic design and video editing genius. And then my little girl, Cassie, who's going to be 9 in a couple of months from now, she's sort of figuring out what she wants to do. 1 minute she wants to be a vet. The next minute she wants to be an actress. So very varied, very varied.
The pantomime horse, then she could be both. She
right. She's a horse girl. She does horse riding every weekend. She absolutely loves it as well. To your point, like my kids are always around at our live events as well. And in fact, actually, last November, we ran the second Long Haul Leader Summit. We're taking a break from it this year, but we probably will bring it back in 2027. And there was actually a comment, and I've never encountered this, and I've run events from 10 people around the boardroom table right the way up to 500 people in an arena before. There was a comment from somebody about halfway through the first day. And my little girl, Cassie, would run up on stage and she would give me cue cards that Chloe had written out to, reminders before lunch and all that kind of stuff. So she'd run up and she'd give me a kiss and then run off backstage and stuff. And this comment came that somebody in the audience had said that they didn't appreciate the fact that there was children running around at a business event. They thought it was unprofessional. And I just couldn't help myself, Jim. I had to talk about it. I had to talk about it on stage. If that's your thing, like, it's okay. Like, I'm not looking at you from a negative perspective, but you have to understand that this isn't your event. This is my event. I'm the one that's running it and putting it on. And one of my favorite things to do is to show my children what I do for a living and to get them involved in a way that they feel like they're part of the team, because they are part of the team. Funnily enough, this lady was not there on day 2. She did not turn up on the second day. And so, you're not for everyone is what I'm getting at here, I think. You can't please all the people all the time. Now, I could have avoided talking about that on stage, and she probably would have come back on the second day. But that's not me. That's not my personal brand. And when you feel strongly about something, I think it's something that you should stand behind, and get on your soapbox a little bit about it. And I'm glad that I did it. Will she ever, spend money or invest money with us in the future? Probably not, but that's okay, because there was another 99 people in the room that day that probably will in some capacity, right? So I'm fine with it.
And I think that brings us in a way full circle back to what you were saying at the very beginning when we talked about AI, that it's still you. Right. And one of the messages for people to take away, for us to take away from this conversation is, AI is not going to remove the human, not going to remove us from being mission critical to the company. And I think there's so much sort of anxiety at the moment in the market about AI. It's really nice to hear you talk with such great confidence about the need to be you and to be different. And that's okay. And it won't appeal to everybody, but that's also okay. And we don't have to try and be, I feel like, homogenous and vanilla flavor. We can be cherry with ice cream and a little bit of something on top.
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk about it in my second book, Rise of the Youpreneur. I talk about this P2P philosophy, or people to people philosophy, that I've had for, well over 20 years now in business. And that is that people will rather do business with people than a logo or a brand. And, I realized this a very long time ago in my career, before I became an entrepreneur, that, I was in the infomercial business for a few years in sales and distribution. And I remember we used to go to Vegas every year for a big conference. It was a 3-day conference, massive conference. And I would be at dinner with some clients. I was the sales guy who would show up. Looking back on it now, it's just so good. But I would show up with the purchase order pad to dinner, not to close the deal, not to close the deal, but to be ready if I did close the deal, and it always got quite interesting reactions. I'd be like, well, I'm glad that you say that we're going to go ahead and do this because I've got this piece of paper here and you can, sign up. And they would be like, wow, like you really thought you were going to get this business, didn't you? And I'm like, well, honestly, I thought that you and I got on with each other, and knowing what I do about my business and the industry, if you get on with someone, then you're more likely to do business with them. And I'm also the kind of guys, when I get the business, I want to make sure I can action it for you, the client, as quickly as possible. So, signing this off now means I can fax it to my team this evening. I talk about that a lot, that instance of being ready for the conversion that comes from the conversation. When that happens, you should be ready to act on it. But equally understand that people will only really truly do business, particularly today, with people that they really know, love, and trust. And it used to be know, like, and trust, but now it's love. Someone has to love you to do business with you, particularly to do it over and over and over again. So that P2P philosophy is something I still stand by very solidly.
I do want to ask you, Chris, about demand. You've got now in your book, you say, you only work Monday to Thursdays, right? And you've got your family working for you. What would you say to the person who says, no, Chris, that's all great for you. You've exited at 50 something. I can't do that. What would you say to that entrepreneur who's listened to our conversation saying, Chris, I'm happy for you. You say you don't need to use AI. You say you can do this. You can do blood work, but that's not my life. What would you say to that person?
It's okay. Do you? It wasn't my life for a long time. Simple as that. I didn't do blood work every quarter until 4 years ago. I didn't have my ducks in a row, since day one. I wasn't working, 6-hour days, 4 days a week. When I first started, I was doing 16-hour days, 7 days a week. You earn your stripes, Jim, I think is what I'm getting at here. Yeah. I know that I'm at the point now where I can take my foot off the gas a little bit and I can run things day to day differently to other people. But guess what? I've been doing it 22 years. I've earned the right to do it. I've done the sleepless nights. I've worried about the bank balances. I had people try and screw me over. I've earned the stripes is what I'm getting at. And everybody has to take their own path. So if you see somebody else doing all these things and you think, well, I can't do all those things. Yes, sure. Do what you need to do right now. But when you are in a position to be able to hit the pause button a minute and step back and look at what it is that you've built and how you've built it, ask yourself the question, how am I going to be able to sustain this? Because as I talk about in the book, hustle is a season. It's not a lifestyle. You can hustle up. There's nothing wrong with hustle, but it's not sustainable. It's not a longevity plan. And so, if you want to be in business 20, 30, 40 years, that's not a sustainable situation. You've got to be able to figure out what to do. And maybe it comes down to, team building and delegation. Maybe it comes down to slowing things down across the board. Maybe making a little less money, but making it for a longer period of time. Everybody has their own different goals, right?
Yeah, and I think, Chris, what's wonderful is a couple of things. One is that you've shown what can be accomplished in spite of burnout to reposition and rebuild. Mm-hmm. You've demonstrated the potential, that it's never too late to come back and it's never too late to redefine and rebuild yourself. But also in your book, there is a genuine framework that people can follow, which I personally have found use in your book just over the weekend and started to take notes for how I can do things differently. Chris, if people want to find out more about you, obviously, and want to find out about Long Haul Leader book, where can they do that?
Well, I wouldn't be much of a personal brand entrepreneur if I didn't have chrisducker.com, would I? So that's
my first piece of advice to my clients is buy your domain name.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I've got all my kids as well, by the way. My eldest actually bought the domain name off me. I probably registered it for about 15 years or something. He eventually bought it off me a few years ago for the measly sum of just £50, even though I probably spent 10 times that amount looking after it.
Thanks for setting the price. I've bought them for my daughters as well, fun enough. So now you've given me a good price.
Yeah. I've got hers as well. I feel like we're just incredibly blessed to be alive at this time as entrepreneurs. There's so much opportunity out there, but I'm also really, really aware now at this point. I kind of look at where I'm at right now. Jim is like, this is my second act. Mm-hmm. I'm just really aware of the fact that success that costs you your health, your relationships, that sort of thing, it isn't really success at all. It's sacrifice. And so I'm just very aware of that right now. I'm also aware of the fact that, being busy is a bit of a trap. Impact should be the real focus. And when, any idiot can fill up a calendar, you shouldn't be looking at that motion as a way of momentum. And I think it's important to focus more on the momentum side of things rather than just saying, oh, I'm so busy, I've got so many things on my calendar. Well, look at those things. A very wise man once said to me, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities. And I always thank Michael Hyatt for asking me that question because he's still a close friend and a mentor. He actually wrote the foreword for the Long Haul Leader as well. So I was very, very blessed for him to be involved with a project too.
Yeah, I saw that as well. But I think we've been blessed, Chris, that you've come on the show. Thank you. And I think that, as you said, you've really earned your stripes. I've watched your career and read your content, listened to your podcast. And so
thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, appreciate you. And I think really appreciate your honesty and your courage and exposing your vulnerability, but also in creating a framework that helps others to move through their journey. So Chris Ducker, thank you so much for joining me today on The Unnoticed Entrepreneur.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Had lots of fun.
Thank you for listening to The Unnoticed Entrepreneur. Be sure to subscribe to the show right now so that you don't miss an episode. There are over 900 to listen to. You can also reach out to Jim at www.jimajames.com.